Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Lindy Elkins-Tanton. Lindy is a planetary scientist, the principal investigator of the NASA Psyche mission, and Arizona State University vice president of the Interplanetary Initiative. Her research concerns the formation and evolution of rocky planets. She has led 4 field expeditions in central Siberia. The asteroid 8252 Elkins-Tanton is named for her, as is the mineral elkinstantonite. In 2020, she received the Arthur L. Day Prize, and in 2010, the Lowell Thomas Award from the Explorers Club. Lindy, or maybe I should say Miss Elkins-Tantonite, welcome to the Future Space.
Thank you, Daniel. It's nice to join you. That would be Dr. Elkins-Tantonite, of course. Yeah.
Dr. Elkins-Tantonite. It's not every day that we get someone where an asteroid and
Oh,
a rock is named
amazing.
after.
Yep.
So,
Amazing.
before we get into some of the big work that you're on right now, the Psyche and your journey, and how you got an asteroid and a piece of rock named after you, could you share with us 3 words that for you capture the essence of space?
For me, those 3 words are we are small. I feel that that's what space is for, is to give us perspective on the importance of humanity and our relationship to each other.
Do you think, I mean, it's for someone who's spent 15 years doing solo wilderness expeditions in nature, it's it's always been an exercise of perspective, right? You go back, you go and find yourself in these forces that are bigger than you. So in that sense, we are indeed very small, but at the same time, we have this significant place in the story of life. And even as we're going into space, we are the first species that we know or we think of that now has the capacity to take life beyond the planet. So do you think that there's a balance between the humility but understanding the responsibility that we have?
Yeah, but I don't think responsibility is the opposite of humility. I think that they go together. I think we have much too much hubris and much too much status signaling and much too much of celebrity worship in our world. And that really what it comes down to is individuals and their relationships with other individuals. We spend so much time locked up in our heads thinking about what's going on in our family, in our community, in our workplace, what's happening in our nation. And we're standing and we're looking down at our little dusty feet and thinking about what our neighbor's doing. We'd be so much better off if we would realize that our individual importance is not so great and that the best thing we can do is use kindness and humility to help all of humanity to do better. And it's nice to say we're the only, we have an important place in the story of life and we're the only species that can get off this planet. And, true, but that's only from our tiny, tiny perspective and from our tiny, tiny corner. I always think of Dr. Seuss's book, Horton Hears a Who, in which this giant elephant has realized that there is a community of people on basically a pollen grain. And to remember that effectively we're living on our pollen grain.
Yeah, I have this thought that the nature on Earth does not work differently than the nature of the universe, right? The principles of nature that apply on this planet cannot be different than the nature of the universe because it's one big entity, right? Whatever works here has to work on a bigger scale in the universe. So if you ask someone to come to Earth and kind of describe what it is, they would see the ocean, they would see us, they would see the planet, but then they would forget to mention maybe one of the most important thing, which is air, which is invisible when you can't see it, but it's right there. So when we look at the universe, it's probably the same thing. There's the what we see and what we don't see, and probably the most important thing is what we don't see. Is that something that sometimes you think about, or
I suppose as a physical scientist, I probably just think about it a little differently because as we're looking at planets around other stars, the only thing we look at is the atmosphere. You can almost never see a surface. And so the atmosphere is everything. And it enables life as we know it. And so we're always looking for that. But of course, to go directly to your point, I think that we have many, many more questions than we have answers in any aspect. We are just infants trying to understand what's around us. And unfortunately, I think that the most likely kind of extraterrestrial life anywhere in any universe is going to be single cellular life living underground. And that's going to be really hard to see.
Now, I want to go back to the humility and perspective, and maybe the best way to get to that is the second question that I always ask is beyond, right, the science story, beyond the technology story, the resource story, the geopolitics of going to space. What do you think for you is the human story of going to space?
And I think the fundamentally underlying story of going to space is that we can't resist exploring. It's just what humans do. It's in our genome. We need to know what's over that hill and what we haven't seen yet. And for literally thousands of years, people have been describing what it would be like for humans to be in space looking back at our planet. And of course, the flat Earth is a modern invention. 2,000 years ago, people knew that in space we'd be looking back at a sphere, and they even imagined what that would look like. And so I think that because we can imagine it and we can see it, we want to go there. And I think that no matter what the geopolitics are, and whether it's a private company, an individual, or a government, whether we think as a species it's a good idea or a bad idea, it's going to happen, because if we can create the technology, we'll make it happen. So that's really what, in fact, Interplanetary Initiative at Arizona State University is about. It's we think of space as being engineers and scientists and NASA and ESA, and JAXA and the rest of the world that's doing this kind of thing. And then we think there's kind of nothing, and then there's sci-fi writers, visionaries. And of course, to go to space as humans, we need all of the parts of humanity to go. So we need the sociologists and the psychologists and philosophers and the people who are religious leaders and every other kind of person, because if it's humans in space, it's all of humanity needs to come to bear. So I think going to space is entirely a human story. And this idea that it's just for scientists or engineers or somehow brilliant people that are not me is entirely a falsehood.
Do you think that the exploration, that gene, the exploration gene, is a trait of the human species? But do you think that it's just the fundamentals of life, of nature? But what we've done is we've created a story around that constant evolution, that life force is always, because I mean the every single species is, I mean, a fungi, a plant, they're always looking to expand and to go beyond, whether we're there or not. But I think that us humans have created the story around that. Do you see the connection, or do you think that it's different?
I think there are two different things there. One is organisms just trying to find more resources that they need to live. And so things like slime molds will travel to nutrition, but they won't travel for the sake of traveling. At least we haven't seen them do that. And so lots of, you think about mammals and all the creatures that are closest to us, and whales and dolphins, extremely, extremely smart, as smart as people in lots of ways. And so do they have that kind of travel curiosity? Some of them stay in their home range more or less voluntarily for their whole lives. I think about, bobcats and things like that. But then other kinds of creatures really do travel seemingly for no reason. Maybe it is just curiosity. Sometimes wolves go long distances or bears go very long distances. And of course, migrating in the oceans, there are habits and trails that cover the whole earth. And so I wonder if there aren't a number of animals that want to just see. They're just curious. And others that are homebodies.
It's funny because in my book Feel the Wild, that is one of the statement that I do about photographing mammals. I'm not. I mean, I like to photograph birds and other things that visually are interesting, but I've always had my desire is to photograph mammals because there's an inherent curiosity that I think that our species or the mammals have, uh, that left to their own devices, right? That curiosity will be structured or free to roam depending of the experience with it. but inherently, I think that there's a curiosity in mammals that makes us go to different places. I remember I was doing an expedition on Kodiak Island, and I was camping at a smaller island. Um, it was about, I don't know, 3 miles offshore, right, surrounded by water, obviously. And I land and I set up camp, and shortly after I set up camp, there's a grizzly bear that comes from the grass, and that was on one side, and then on the other side there were some deers that were just grazing on the hill. And in that moment, I realized that all of us, the bear, the deer, and myself, had all kind of ventured away. And in my head, I was just like, we all kind of sat at the beach and go, I wonder, what if I go over there? And then, we're all kind of connected by this decision of leaving the land and venturing beyond. So
Because they came to an island. That's right, wondering what's there. Yeah, I've done a whole bunch of geology field work and had a number of trips to remote areas in central Siberia for long periods of time, or summers, and we saw almost no wild animals, even though we were hundreds of kilometers from any settlement, hundreds of kilometers from roads or railroads. We were on rivers or we were dropped by helicopters. But even in the most remote parts of central Siberia, animals are hunted regularly by lots of kind of people who live outside of towns. And so they're very, very wary. Um, and it made me think about the kinds of constraints that would cause or stop a creature from moving from where it is and following its natural curiosity in the way that we think that humans are doing. And of course, for the deer, if they think they're just going to be constantly eaten, maybe they'll find an island. And for these animals, they wouldn't, I don't think, go on long curiosity journeys because they're constantly trying to avoid being killed. and so, and so my mind drifted to horses because I spent a lot of time training horses, and a lot of the horses would prefer to stay home with their herd. They would like to stay in the stable or in their favorite pasture, and they actually don't want to go out and go seek stuff. But I had one very audacious horse who just always wanted to jump over anything she saw and run. She just wanted to be out there going someplace. And there was one day before she'd even ever had a saddle on her, she was so young and crazy, and she was running around in an outside pasture with, I don't know, 4.5 foot fence, and she just jumped right over the fence and then ran straight away. Ran at top speed completely away. Just feeling great, and I feel like that's the kind of spirit that that a lot of people feel when they feel the freedom to break through whatever predators are in their everyday lives and just go explore for curiosity, which it sounds like you've done so much of too.
yeah, and that's the big debate in the conversation, that there's life works in the if we look at the conservation of energy, and usually the life tries to take the easiest path between point A and point B, and anything outside of that involves an investment in energy that can actually be risky, if we're looking at surviving. But sometimes there's going to be the outlier who really goes off script, and we find that, like, even within families where one sibling will decide to go to the big city and leaving everyone behind, and then you have the sense of abandonment. Why is it that, like, we're not good enough for you, you have to go to the big city? So that sense of abandonment that even we see right now, on with about going to space or at the expense of Earth, that that story is nothing new. Um, but it's interesting to see how and maybe that's where the exploration gene is the majority of organisms usually try to create stability so that you can build on that. But then from time to time, you have these individuals who will go and seek beyond that.
Yeah, it's phylogeny versus ontogeny. Is it their social experience that's caused them to want to go, or is there really a genetic basis? Is it an individual kind of thing like that? And uh, I think that that's always been true, like you say. There are people who stick with the clan and people who reject the clan. And I think that it's even the energy thing about the least path of least energy is certainly applicable to microorganisms. And then as soon as you get into higher organisms, that's a little bit harder to do. Just in the last couple of years, people have discovered that bumblebees have a sense of play, and if you give them toys, they will play with them for no reason. so, and so I think that we're all complicated and do things for many, many reasons. And I think the biggest risk, though, that goes along with the resentment of being left behind, or why did you choose to go to Mars and leave your family here, whatever it is the potential for wealth to be obtained from space resources. Right now, space is just a great way to spend a lot of money, but someday maybe it would be a way to make a lot of money. And I think that if we do break through that barrier, it will be an unprecedented chance to bring wealth, and which means that there'll be an unprecedented social stratification between those that have and have not, worse than anything in the previous history of humankind, which is yet another reason to talk about these topics the way you're doing, and try to get governments and people involved in equalizing access in a more serious way. Not everyone will want to go, but everyone should benefit.
Yeah, it's there's the short term, the midterm, and the long term impact of these moves. We often talk about how like this next move is similar to previous great migrations, whether it was Europe. What were the incentive for people to cross an entire ocean and start something new? Well, Europe was a total mess, and people were looking for a new opportunity. And to the note what you just said about potential for wealth, right? After with the migration and the arrival in North America, you had these big monopolies,
Oh, East India,
East India basic, who literally rule the entire world and let
literally, yes, yeah.
some of the biggest, abuse the war of opium in China, just for the market of tea. So there's definitely comparison that can be made about how it was done back then and the risks of how it could be. I mean, can be done also today. But I think that there's already an awareness or a certain narrative or desire not to repeat that. Do you see that around you, or you think that we're closer than the mistakes of the past?
Oh, I think I sadly I am not quite as much of an optimist as I used to be about this outcome. I just think that it's simplistic and facile to say that human nature is human nature, but it does seem to be. We seem to be more nationalistic than ever in many different nations across the world right now, and there is actually a very significant movement on every continent to try to make space more diverse and equal, and to do it better. And everyone always refers to Star Trek, the original philosopher space travel show about the kind of humanity we could be, where we would do it together instead of as nations. And yet, all the signs of progress right now are that it's nationalistic. The US feels threatened by China's speed, and China's trying to be first, and of course Russia, and then ESA has amazing things in JAXA, and moon settlements. And is there going to be any standard, and is anyone going to share? And the weaponization of Earth orbit is very worrying. And so I can only say that all the people who are trying to do it differently, we all need to speak up more even than we are. Although there are dozens and dozens of small organizations that are working on this effort, and of course the UN as well. But I fear that it's almost like we all agree that we should be nice to each other, and we're all nice to each other until someone sees a chance for a big advantage. It's like the prisoner's dilemma. And then all the niceness falls away. And it gets down to brass tacks, which in the end is going to be, it's a proxy for war, just like Apollo was. So I hope that we do it better because so many people are thinking about it and trying to do it better. But British East India Company is a perfect analogy, I think. What do you think? Do you think we're going to be able to do it better? What do you think? What is better to you?
I think that part of the um, even in nature, right? The fundamentals of nature, conflict is is inevitable, is part of that system. Um, and I think that part of the struggle that we have is understanding how we want to come together, but at the same time, I think that we're naive on how that journey is. I think that like on a similar something similar, we want this inclusion in our conversation on Earth, right? We want everybody to come to the table. So life is becoming more complex. The idea of what it takes to manage and to understand life is more complex because back in the days it was more black and white. Either you like it or you don't like it. Now we have to broaden the horizon. But at the same time, we've forgotten to give people the skills to navigate that complexity. So people find refuge into the polarization because it's too much effort. Well, now I have to think of this and I have to think of that, and it's a lot of fighting ideas as opposed to try to find a commonality or certain ground for. And this is for me, this is where future space is. It's trying to bring it down to the human story because at the end of the day, everybody is trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to put food on the table. We're all trying to find something valuable, and we want to give our children a future. Even the people that we disagree with, or even the people that we think are awful, are starting from the same point, or they're coming from a place of hurt and suffering, and the empathy has to come through. But because we forget, because we're a bit naive on what life should be, we forget the necessity to give people the skills and how how to communicate, how to participate in this story. So going to space, it's not going to be. It's like the kids that leave the family, right? They want to do better than their parents, but in the end they will make their own mistakes and they will be judged by the past and the future in the same way that they judge themselves. So for us to look at the past and go and say, how could they do something like this? If we judge with that lens, then we have to accept that we're going to be judged by the future in that same way. And but we're trying to do the best. So going into space, there will be conflict, and we have to give ourselves the skills to anticipate these conflicts, that dynamic ecosystem, so that we can become more resilient. Because if we're looking, and that's I think that the word resiliency, finding these structures that can move with the unexpected and these differences, so that people can evolve together as opposed to at the expense of each other. So
Hmm. Yeah, it's almost if we could just take all of education and make it into civics and relationships and communication. It'd be amazing. And I was rereading M.K. Jemison's book Dawn, and in it the aliens that have taken over the Earth say that humanity has one fatal flaw, which would have caused us trouble no matter how long we persisted, and that was that we were too hierarchical. I kept waiting for the book to say, so how would we reorganize? Like, what are your suggestions? And they didn't come along. And so I was thrown back on MJ Rubinstein's recent essay, just suggesting that maybe humans don't yet deserve another planet. That we should figure it out a little better before we go. So this is,
yeah,
mhm.
I mean, if from my perspective, no one is ever ready. Like no one is ever ready to have children. No one is ever ready to do anything or even go to school. But it's and whatever solution that you think works for one time becomes problematic after, right? I think that part of Star Trek, the attraction of Star Trek is that they had taken a lot of the issues and put it aside, right? No money, great, everything. and then you can approach certain realities, but like there was no there was the understanding of the economics of Star Trek. Well, where does everything comes from, and who pays for everything, and how, and everybody wears the same T-shirt. So where's the individual? We want to be individual, but then we're all equal in a sense. So all these different, I think that as we live them becomes a little bit more complex, and also, we're not a static species. I think that we do our best when we're pressured to come up with something that fit, answers issues. When things are too good, I think that we become extremely protectionist and too arrogant. I think that we need that tension, that brings. I mean, that's for me. That's the thing about suffering and pain. It's the greatest equalizer in the world. It's every single person comes from a place of that experience suffering and pain. Not everyone is wealthy, not everyone is healthy, not everyone has made it, but every single person can experience and has
Yeah.
experienced suffering. So
That's exactly my motivation for writing my memoir was I think a lot of autobiography and memoir is about talking about how you reached some, achievement. But to me, anything that could be called that is so fleeting, and that what you really need is to connect with other humans on a common basis, which is that everyone's life has ups and downs, and the downs can be profound, and we share that. And so to create that common connection and that piece of empathy. And unfortunately, I think that people who are in suffering are not necessarily the most altruistic, and figuring out how to make things a little bit more even, and of course, a lot of the polarization that's in the world today is because of a sense that there's no piece of the pie for me. And so in Star Trek, with where we've left a world of scarcity and come to a world of abundance, a universe, an existence of abundance, where you don't need a market because there's plenty for everyone. It's a great thought experiment, isn't it? It would change so much.
but how do you get there? How do you get from, I mean, you have obviously the technology needs. I mean, I do see, like, even on our own planet, where energy, I think it's going to be ubiquitous. I think that there's, like, right now, we live in an era where information is ubiquitous, and back in the days, information was a market. I do believe that energy at some point we won't even think of how scarce or how difficult it is because now we have the technology. But will there be something else that is harder to get? Like, is it the double-edged sword that the technology that once you open one door, then you create a new, like, the struggles don't change. It's just that the scale or the 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 form itself changes. What do you think?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine a society of perpetual abundance when we live in a closed system, which is this planet, and especially as overpopulated as we are. But I think all these things come together to remind me of what I think of as humanity's real superpower, which is metacognition. If you can think about the process instead of just the thing, then you can always be better. The thing you said, you're never ready to be a parent, you're never ready to go to school, and that's a little bit based upon the idea that you should be able to do it right the first time, which is never true ever. And so what you really need is the ability to understand how to take a first step, how to look down upon what you've done and what worked and didn't work, and reassess. In order to think about the active thinking, to think about the larger process, not just the facts of your tactics. And I think that's what's really going to help us as a species, and it certainly helps every individual to realize that there's no such thing as ready, and so you just have to go.
And there's never, the idea of perfection is not something that she should strive for either, because there's nothing that comes out of perfection, right? Where do you go? If things were perfect, there would be nothing else to do or to go or to learn. And nature itself wants to stay away as far as possible from perfection, because we would not be here today if it was perfect, right? So nature, we think of nature as this place of perfection where everything is in balance, but the reality of nature is in constant flux and conflict and tension and disruptions and tension creation, and ultimately this entire organism works connected as we are, but this idea of harmony is only when you really step back from really 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 far away, and then you realize.
Yeah, that's
But
right. If you look from a very great distance, it looks incredibly peaceful. But of course, that's the nature of life. Almost the definition of life is a constant search for resources, and therefore bumping up against other creatures searching for resources. And something I think that a lot of people don't realize is we go through large extinction events where lots of species go extinct at a certain time, like the end of the dinosaurs, or the one that I spent a lot of time studying, the end Permian, 252 million years ago, which was almost the end of multicellular life. And the extinction event we're in right now, human caused. But there are extinctions all the time. There's no moment in Earth history where there were not extinctions happening. Just they go through peaks and valleys. And so all the time, this struggle leads to no resources for some species, and then they're gone. And I feel like that is the fundamental truth, as you say, of what life does.
so sometimes I find like the part of the goal that we need to have in the space industry and also in the environment industry, because for many years the issue that I had with the environmental narrative was one that was coming out of righteousness. We must save the planet because it's our duty, and if life is to exist on this planet is because we're the protector. It was nothing different than Noah saving the animals with the ark, but now it's about us and the planet. When in reality, in nature, there are no right or wrong. There are just winners and losers depending of what happens. And there's these moments where the canvas is erased, and that event allows something else to come up. And then is it good, is it bad? Where it depends where you sit in an equation, right? The dinosaurs disappeared. Is it good, is it bad? Well, it kind of sucks for them, but it was to our advantage. So when we talk about life on the planet, I think that we have to be careful and say we want to do that because this is the world, the type of world that we want to live in, and because we choose to be that type of society, but not to give it to the planet as if like this is the like we're gonna save life, because ultimately it could something else could be better after that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. And we're trying to, right, there's this whole problem in conservation of trying to save what we imagine was the primal state. But actually, we have no idea what the primal state was, and there is no single primal state. As you say, it's constantly changing. And the thing that we think of as the primal state, something like 200 years ago or 300 years ago, was already completely changed by earlier humanity. The Pleistocene extinction of all the megafauna, probably caused by early humans eating them. And so you're right. Could we not just help this ecosystem continue to exist in some way? And even with climate change, even if we don't succeed in ameliorating any of its effect, we're the ones who are going to suffer the most. It's not going to be the end of life on the earth or the end of the planet. It's going to be the end of people in the way that we understand it. So it's really us pretending we're doing it for someone else, but really it's for us. So
It is.
yeah,
It is.
yeah.
It's. And I think that they would. I think that ultimately it would help people come to the table better because
Mm,
it's for us, right?
self-serving. It's
The
self-serving.
It's self-serving as opposed to, because I mean I've every time that I've been at a table with families are like, listen, would love to do better, but ultimately I have to do for my family first,
You're like,
and
this
the
is it.
economics and the economics are that's it. So, but the idea that morally we are wired to do better, when I think that the reality or the opposite. I think that we
Yes.
don't do
Yeah.
well. we don't do well morally. I think that we do well with things that are concrete and the incentive, where the incentives are. Like we can talk about the garbage in the ocean as much as we want to, but my physical relationship with garbage is that at the end of the day, I take my bag to the street.
Exactly. Exactly.
That is tangible. That is something that I can talk about. The rest is conceptual. We can discuss about it for hundreds of years,
Yep.
but if there's no incentive to change the root of that behavior, then it's really hard.
I've often wondered, I used to have this conversation with my uncle. He claimed really what you're saying and what I also know to be true, which is that people in general make the decision that's in the best advantage to themselves or their families in the short term. So they're looking very locally, spatially, just them and their closest relationships, and very locally in time as well. And I wonder if there's some way to measure a person's willingness to do the right thing, even if it's not in the immediate best interest of their family. Maybe those, if we could measure that, maybe those are the people we should have be in leadership. That's,
That's and that's the thing. It's like so yes, we look at our short term and then we try to put people in leadership who can help us manage the long term, or we look at our environment to see who is doing what so that we can, and then we have the peer pressure of society. It's like, oh, I was going to do that. Like if there was no law, right, no consequences on any action, a lot of people would be like, well, I do this or I do that. But we're kind of, most of us, we stay in lane because there are consequences.
that's right. And it's easier too. It's more restful. And, and in the end, I think we're really picking leaders who we also think will benefit us in the relatively short term. And so it's a very much of a positive feedback loop in a way that's not helpful. So, so with that in mind, where do you think, what do you think, who's going to be living on Mars and what are they going to be doing there, say in 100 years?
100 years, 100 years is going to be interesting how far we are because it's a pretty drastic leap. I think that we're going to have outposts. Um, and there's a big debate as if really developing Mars the solution or having low orbit stations because yeah, but I think that there's going to be I think that the impact is going to be the same as everything that's been done before, which these new land of opportunity and the technology needed to reach those end up elevating the whole, right? The even if we look at the 1900s where you had Edison, Tesla, and the Wright brothers that were trying to power the world and take the sky when people were like dealing with diseases, and exactly the same opposition was happening back then. Why? Who cares about power? I mean, who cares about electricity? Benjamin Franklin had to sell all his position, to fund his work because no one thought that it was, there was a value.
What an amazing person. Yeah.
Insane, right? But here we are, and in the world that they created, elevated the whole. I remember going to the um, the National Library in Washington, D.C., and realizing how America represented this ideal of starting something new and being better than Europe. And you can see the effort and the work that was put into that. A lot of mistakes, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of collateral damage, but ultimately there was a vision that really drove the
It was a vision. It was inspiring.
and I
We've had
think that Moon and the Mars and whatever ends up being out there is going to be just that next opportunity, that next land of opportunity. And I think that the technology that we're about to discover to make that leap are going to radically change what we think of the human experience. What we think is today are about to be taken upside down. Uh,
It's the big driver.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
agree. I agree. And I sometimes have people come up to me and say, how can you justify spending $1 billion of government money to send a robotic probe to an asteroid. And there's so many different answers to that, reasons why we have to, reasons why we will, reasons why. But the simplest answer is, of course, we spend every dollar here on Earth. All of those dollars go to jobs and technology development and communities and helping individuals and their families. And so it's all about us here on Earth across every discipline, not just a few fancy scientists. And that's the truth of it.
I posted recently, um, right, because of that question that we always get, like why, like that all that money. Even just recently, apparently Obama said some things like, "I would love that Silicon Valley stops with this obsession of space and take that money and divert it back into things of climate change." I was like, well, Obama, why did you say, why did you say
Yeah,
that? But
yeah, yeah.
ultimately, and so the post that I did on LinkedIn was comparing the investment in space compared to the investment or the money spent in entertainment and sport. And you have this multi-trillion industry, right, that is invested or that is spent to do absolutely nothing but just to entertain us. And no one questioned, why I would spend $500 to go and see Taylor Swift. But that's so the having a sense of comparison so that people can understand, like, well, not everything in life that we choose to spend money um, leads to anything that is, goal oriented, like climate change, and we don't question that. But then when it comes to space, then we're really quick at pointing the finger. So,
Yeah, I think it's been also trivialized and also made into kind of a myth through watching it on films. And so just like with professional sports, it is inspiring. It gives us a sense of what we could be. It gives us a sense of power going to space. It expands our mind instead of being a narrative of pain and shame and fear like pandemics and climate change. It's a narrative of hope, and it reminds us of who we can be aside from all of the technological advantages. And then I always say also, flying and then space have created that incredible leap in human evolution, which is systems engineering. The ability to build something so complicated that no single person understands how it works, but together it works. That is a miracle in human development that is often overlooked. And the fact that we've developed that literally to figure out how to go to space means that we now have those tools to help fix problems on Earth. And the huge difference is if I took our $1 billion budget and spent it instead on climate change, it would have virtually no effect. That's like pouring money on these things is not really the answer because those are social problems that have to do with convincing groups of people to take action. If it was just building a thing, it would have happened already. So it's a hard one.
and it's always and often people they want change, but then they don't want the consequences of change, right? They want child labor across the world, but then they don't want to pay more for what they have.
Yes, right.
They don't want drilling in the Arctic, but then the minute that the gas goes up, then they start screaming. So Ted Kennedy doesn't want reliance on oil industry, but he doesn't want the windmills in his backyard. So
Yeah, that's a tricky one right there. That's a really terrible one. Yeah.
it's the dynamics, and even for the politicians, I mean, I know that politicians nowadays do more damage control than anything else because our society, we ourselves don't allow them to do the work either. Because so it's we're all drinking the Kool-Aid and we're all participating, and ultimately, until we all accept the consequences of change, and that's why sometimes for change is not something that is can be prepared for. It's something that we react to, and then we figure a way forward, right? It's like the often when you go, in Antarctica, when the penguins get to the close to the shore, they all they all know where they're going. They're all going to the shore, but once they get to that water, Now they all start to freak out, and then they stop until everybody start pushing behind, and then one is gonna jump, and then the moment that that one jumps, then everybody start going, and then they escape from the leopard seal.
Exactly. They figure that first one's going to be eaten by the leopard seal and they'll jump second. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're saying something I think that Socrates said, which is that democracy will fail because it relies on having every person in the democratic society understand democracy and be educated. And that's not sustainable. And that I think sadly is kind of where we are. That's what we're seeing.
It's a cycle, right? The we saw that with the unions, and then the unions come to fix a problem of monopoly until that solution becomes part of the problem, and then you need that kind of almost tyrannic personality that
Yes,
is able
right.
to. I mean, that
Yeah.
has always been the big debate, and these people like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, and even Emilia Hart. Like, these personalities are not your most gentle personalities. They're the breaker of systems, and to break those systems, or even these really strong, powerful women from the some years ago who broke the system of patriarchy. They were It's a double-edged sword, right? You need that kind of personality to go against the grain, and the bigger the system to break, the bigger the personality also can become your worst enemy. Like, we also
Absolutely. It takes a person who is Teflon to the slings and arrows. It takes a person who's a bit of a sociopath who can do things without so much remorse, has the strength to go forward, and that's a double-edged sword. Um, I'm just full of quotes today. That great is it George Bernard Shaw who said, "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world, and the unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself, and therefore all progress depends upon the unreasonable man," or something like that. Something like that. And so that's where we are. We need that unreasonable person who's willing to forge forward and make the change. But as you say, then we're in this cycle, the tyrant, no the masses, no the tyrant, no the masses. And so you see this cycle going on and on over hundreds of years. So what is progress? What part of that is progress?
for me, the idea of progress is managing these changes and becoming better as a whole than the individual parts, right? If we look, it's really easy. It's like, a marriage. The marriage, if you can continue develop, if you can continue having respect and love for each other as you navigate change together, and these conflict, these different periods, right? Here are two people who meet at a particular time in their lives, and they're one individual, the young, and then life happens. Loss, failures, suffering, children, and now you have different perspective, different new people that are now living together. But if you can continue that relationship and developing the skills of communicating, and also maintaining that respect for each other, then ultimately, that's for me, that's how that's as progress, right? Managing change and not becoming worse. So as a society, we are 8 billion right now. We're about to go to more. And I do believe that there's a lot more good than bad being done on the planet. We're just not really focusing on it. Because if there was more bad on the planet, there would be good. I think it would be a lot worse than it
Yeah.
is right now. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that. Yeah. I also think we have to stay optimistic. I think that being
yeah,
pessimistic is lazy and also
yeah.
totally ineffective. so, so you
And
have to stay
unfortunately,
optimistic.
these every time you have these actors that happen in life, or because nature or whatever it is, and their sole purpose is to wake up, to shock the system, to see how like to force us to reassess what is important and what is not important. In politics right now, obviously, we're seeing that, and but it's hard to disconnect them from the progress that we make, because I mean, even the Second World War II, I don't think that we would be here today with the UN and with kind of a common peace without
That's
these
right.
tragedies. COVID, at some point, we'll look
Yeah.
back and we'll say more good came out of COVID than bad, without dismissing the all the tragedies and the death that happens. But it's what we end up doing with those events that really define, whether negative or positive. And even in politics, right after Trump got into politics, we actually saw an upsurge of women involvement in politics, which was not, I would have not. I don't think that the Me Too movement would have happened had Trump not been in politics.
I think that's very possible. It
So,
just pushed people over the brink to hear him bragging about
yeah.
sexual harassment. Yeah.
Lindy, I want to be mindful of your time. I think that we could we just have, I think we would need like just maybe a glass of wine or a bottle of wine and we can continue this.
Keep going indefinitely.
What?
Yeah.
We haven't even touched about anything, but your work in psyche. This is for me. This is what I love. That's the human story, right? When you're able to get people out of their s- their um, their work and the technology, and you get to what we are, then the
Yeah.
conversation can keep going. What would
It's all that really matters. And anybody who wants to learn about the mission or my work can find it in many other places. So it's not necessary to repeat.
we will put all the links in the description.
Oh, thanks.
So, but at the to end this conversation, what would be Lindy's three words of wisdom, just to extend this conversation even longer?
Yeah.
Three words of wisdom by Lindy. Maybe that's the title of your memoir. Three.
Yeah, no, no, like I was joking with you before, I don't think of myself as a dispenser of wisdom or advice. And what I try to do is connect with people by offering what's happened to me as data that you can compare to other things that you know and see if it's useful, that kind of information. And so when I was thinking about what are my three words of wisdom, I think the thing that's been my big driver my whole life and that I try to share with other people is you have agency. That every single person has the ability to see what's wrong around them and to take steps to making change. And this idea, which has gone all through our conversation, that you somehow have to be able to fix the whole thing, do it 100%, reach perfection, never, ever, ever true. The whole key is to start making steps, no matter how small they are, little micro heroics. Just take your little steps. And you're never anonymous and you're never too young or too inexperienced. So my three words are you have agency.
I love it. I This is one of the things that the process of discovery of these words, right? The before that I had the Proust Nature Questionnaire, and I kind of asked similar things, three words of that describe nature. But these three words of wisdom, like how did it come up together, and some of the plays that people make, and we have agency is the first one. First of all, I have to congratulate you. It's
Oh,
no one
yeah.
has ever come up with this one.
What's yours, Daniel? What are your three words of wisdom? I imagine they change over time. What are the ones for today?
The first one, the first thing that came to mind was life is messy.
There you go. That's a nice corollary, actually. I think
It's
our two go together very, very well.
Yeah, it's if you understand that life is messy and the downs are as important as the highs, the lows, and even have more value than the lows.
And they're unavoidable.
Yeah. So then your goal is not to avoid them, but to develop the skills so that you can grow, right? Each one is an opportunity to become better, to
That's
learn, to
right.
grow.
That's right.
At the fundamental, like even if you think on the cellular level, the muscles, the only way that they can grow is by pushing the boundaries and almost destroying themselves so that they can rebuild, right? So, unfortunately, the nature of life is against the idea of not having failure, or not having, like, we will have failure, we will
Yeah,
make mistakes, we will
100%.
and even in the best of intentions. So try not to avoid it, and try to develop the skills to do it one, and then one step at a time. Right? There will never be that giant leap
That's
to.
right. Just to put a foot forward. Just try something. Doesn't matter what it is. Try something.
Lindy, it's been a wonderful pleasure to have this conversation. Thank you so much, and
Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been great, Daniel. Thank you.
until next time.